We are pleased to welcome on to the 966 Mr. Mansour El-Zahab, head of MENA for FrontierView, and Zeynep Kosereisoglu, director for Turkey and the MENA region at FrontierView. FrontierView, with hubs in DC, London, and Singapore, is a leading market intelligence and research company founded in 2008 and is now part of Fiscal Note after being acquired in 2021. Earlier in this year, in 2023, Mansour authored a post on Saudi Arabia's regional HQ program, highlighting the legal and practical details of the regulation ahead and its effective date starting just next year. We are excited to discuss this with you both. Welcome onto the 966.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
We really are happy to have you on. This is a fascinating topic and an important topic. And Lucian and I do this every week on the 966, and this seems to be like a lot of topics in Saudi Arabia where it was notional. I think the announcement was issued in 2019, and now things are becoming real. So actually, from 2019, now we're 3 months away, as Lucian mentioned, January 2024, when the regional HQ requirements kick in. So really timely conversations. Thanks so much for being here. Before we leap into it, Zeynep, can you tell us a little bit about FrontierView and your work? And I guess you guys are coming off a really fascinating event you just put on in Dubai. So please share.
Of course, thank you. Our FrontierView, we are a research advisory firm. We focus on macroeconomic, political, regulatory developments. We analyze how they impact multinational companies, their operations, the outlook for the demand for their products and services. And we work exclusively with senior executives, so general managers, heads of strategy, heads of finance, that level of executives, which means we've been working a lot with them on this regional headquarters regulation. It has been top of mind for every executive we're talking to in the Middle East region, but outside of the Middle East region. And we share our, research through events, as you've mentioned. We've hosted over 70 executives in Dubai last month, but also through our analysis, and we talk to executives quite frequently. So we're looking forward to sharing what we're hearing from the executives today.
Wonderful. And just a really simple opening, Mansour. I mean, what is the regional headquarters? What is the initiative, and what does the Saudi government aim to achieve through this RHQ?
Yeah, this has essentially just been the same question we've been hearing constantly over the last 12 months or so. So I'll try to describe it in the best way possible. Really, the main goal here is that Saudi wants to diversify its economy. It has a very clear vision, and it's very committed to take its economy to a more sustainable place, rely a lot less on oil, and really kind of start to rely more on a very diversified economy with many industries in. And so one way they thought of doing that is to bring in more specializations, more skills, and a variety of operations into the kingdom, and use that as a strategy to push the economy into the next evolution, really. And so in 2019, the Saudi government issued a notice requiring that all multinationals to have a regional headquarters office based in the kingdom, most likely in Riyadh, if they want to sell to the public sector. And they use that as probably one of the best incentives to try bring in multinationals. We all know that the opportunity that most multinationals are very keen on capturing in the MENA region is the public sector opportunity and the huge projects that are ongoing in the kingdom. So if multinationals want to take a slice of that pie, they have to exist in the kingdom, and they have to do some substantial work, taking on more responsibilities internally, not just looking to sell into the kingdom. In more practical explanations, you can kind of think of it as a business license, right? So a multinational now requires this new business license. It's a non-commercial license. It's a very kind of operations-based one, and they need to showcase some real headquarters-based activities so that they can be compliant, so that they can get that business license, and so that they can really sell and emerge themselves into the many tenders that are available in the kingdom. And all of that has to happen before the turn of the year, so just before 2024. It's really being handled by the Misa, so essentially the Ministry of Investments in Saudi Arabia. They're the main stakeholder on the authority side, and they just want to bring in as many companies as possible and get that the economy diversified in a substantial manner.
So we're going to want to get into all the questions that are posed to you by all these multinationals. But so what companies are subjected to this rule specifically, and what defines compliance? I think that's probably the shade, the grayest area for all the people who are coming to ask you for advice.
Yeah, so really the umbrella of what companies have been affected is quite wide. So you're either directly impacted through compliance or otherwise. If we focus on that first portion, it's the main category is that if you're selling to the public sector or to a public authority, you fall under that regulation. So you could be a healthcare company, you could be a construction company, you could be a technological, a logistics firm, or any other various industry that is looking to sell a product or a solution to any public project or a public procurer. And what's really more interesting is that the MENA region really kind of operates on a mixed channel basis, right? So you have some multinationals operating directly, so they have a physical presence in the kingdom. Some other companies really have relied on distributors or local partners on the ground. It doesn't matter if you're operating directly or indirectly, and you're selling to the government or a public procurer. You are under that compliance, necessary regulation of the RHQ program overall. And we received quite a few questions actually early on, because it was a bit of a gray area as to whether PIF projects fall under that restriction, right? And the FrontierView kind of approach and the perspective has always been that it doesn't matter if because PIF is a little bit of a tricky situation. It's a quasi private public entity. The way that we looked at it is still very publicly funded. So it does fall under the regulation. So even if you're looking to sell to a PIF-owned company within the Saudi Kingdom, you would have to be compliant with the RHQ program. And essentially, that's driving most of the opportunity, really, actually. The PIF is owning most of these projects. So you have to be compliant if you're selling to that space as well.
So, sorry, Mansour, just to clarify for our listeners. So if I want to contract something in Qiddiya or Neom or logistics or do this, and you're effectively saying PIF is the government. Mm-hmm. So you PIF, have to comply with the RHQ.
Yes, so PIF is amongst one of the public authorities. That's the name that's given to these various procurers, really. So you have to be compliant with it, yes. I believe the only exception that we can see when it comes to PIF is if you're selling to a PIF-owned entity outside of the kingdom. Then here you may be exempt, so long as that solution or that product is not within the borders of Saudi Arabia.
Gotcha. And sort of an extension of this, you said this has been managed mostly by the Ministry of Investment, Misa. Do they have an in-house consulting? Can you go and ask a question to Misa and say, can you clarify this for me? Do I qualify? Am I required to comply here?
I think I might take this one. We've been talking to a lot of executives who have been engaging with Misa. They are very much, it seems, cooperating and conversing with Misa, all these multinational companies. But of course, the process of engaging with them is quite uneven across different companies. Some companies have proactively approached Misa with certain proposals, and they have had negotiations with them. Others have been approached by Misa itself. Other companies are a bit more hesitant yet to approach Misa, although we are approaching the end of the year. So there's definitely a kind of team inside Misa that is tasked to ensure that they are talking to multinational companies, that they are actually kind of taking them through whether their proposal is sufficient or not before they engage in that final implementation.
And this is one of the fascinating things we'll get to a little later. I know it's of real interest to Lucian and myself, is what different companies have done and where they find themselves now. But before we do that, what defines compliance? And I think this was, everyone asked the question, well, what does it mean? Can I just put one of my people in Riyadh and say, you're my headquarters? Does that satisfy the requirements? Well, what defines compliance?
So that is exactly what the authorities wanted to avoid. And although maybe at the start there was a little bit of ambiguity, essentially or Misa listed very comprehensively certain activities and essentially operations that you have to undertake within the kingdom for it to count as that you're compliant. And the way that we think about them is that you have a strategic kind of category of activities. This is anything from really helping create the regional strategy from the business side, coordinating with various other hubs and other markets, thinking about your portfolio management, reviewing your financial and investment decisions. All of that fit underneath the strategic direction kind of category. You also need to undertake a selection of strategic management operations, and that includes matters such as business planning, budgeting, kind of reviewing competition dynamics. Marketing falls under that category as well. And you also have a little bit more of a kind of loose category, which you can kind of choose a selection of, operations such as sales support or HR, auditing, compliance, legal, logistics, advisories. These kind of things have to also be included. You need to showcase that you're doing a selection of these various operations to be compliant. And you also need to make sure that because this is where it gets a little bit competitive in the region, right? You have to make sure that as part of the hub in Riyadh, it covers a certain amount of some substantial markets. I think we used to hear kind of very casual, let's say, anecdotes of some multinationals thinking if they can kind of go in with saying, okay, we'll look at Oman, we'll look at Kuwait and Saudi. The idea is you need to have some substantial amount of work being done. So you have to choose or to cover markets that are creating quite a bit of your business in the Middle East, North Africa region. You couldn't just get away with kind of the absolute minimum, if that makes sense.
Again, it's so interesting. And this MNC will go unnamed, but a large pharma who was an early mover on this. And they were saying, thank goodness, because what the deal we got is significantly better than one that folks are getting now. How have the compliance requirements changed? Have they gotten tighter, stricter? How have they evolved over this is because this is a 4-year period now.
Yeah, no, I think we know who you're referring to be honest. And I think we've heard that with many multinationals that we've worked with as well in the healthcare space, because they were really the first movers when you're thinking of various industries. It really has changed quite a bit. I mean, the first thing is Misa wanted to bring in as many kind of companies as quickly as possible. So they were actually incentivizing to say we could be a little bit more flexible kind of early on. That changed a couple of times throughout because also Misa has a certain goal that it would like to achieve. So they are kind of being as flexible as possible and facilitating that movement. But when we're thinking of how did compliance evolve over time, you can kind of think of it as, initially the Saudi authorities and Misa kind of did naturally start with the stick approach. And the reason for that is they really wanted to make sure that the message is going out very clearly that Saudi is very committed to this reform. And they wanted to make sure that multinationals and the private sector is taking this seriously, and they don't end up essentially leaving it right to the end, and then you end up with a kind of a bottleneck situation. The initial reaction that we saw from the multinationals that we work with and kind of what we were hearing from on the ground is that unfortunately, yes, a number of multinationals opted for the wait and see kind of approach. And then now, kind of in the last 10, 12 months, they started to hurriedly get the proposals together. There was a lot of confusion. Everyone wanted to meet with Misa to get their ideas and kind of run the ideas by them so that they don't leave it right up to the deadline. And so we started to see more kind of hands on deck with that approach. And then many multinationals came to us and said, okay, we need help. What did other companies do? What worked for them? What can we do? So you can kind of started to see that urgency really spiked all of a sudden. But the compliance did also start to bring in more of the carrot, in the sense that there were a lot of incentives that were being also provided. And Misa is quite in tune with the internal multinational challenges that you face. At the end of the day, there is a big misalignment, or there was a big misalignment between the local teams and then corporates outside of the region. We had many stories, and many of our kind of clients and the multinationals that we operate with have come to say to us when we're on the ground in Saudi or in Dubai, essentially they've said, look, we get this importance, but I don't know how to communicate to corporate that this is very urgent. Now, understandably, corporate may have seen it as, this is a big investment. This is a big exposure that we're going to put in the kingdom. And so we're not sure how to do it yet, given that there is still quite a lot of or lack of clarity around how it will be implemented and when it will start and how serious it is. Of course, that's all changed, but the really interesting thing is that Misa tried to also accommodate for that. They knew that such challenges will pop up, and they've left that window so wide, so that you're talking about that 4-year window. They've done that on purpose so that many of these challenges will start to surface and they can resolve them in due time. And we started to see a bit more of a flexible approach, a little bit more incentives being kind of provided so that they can resolve some of the concerns that corporate might have, and perhaps try to close or help align, let's say, local teams with a corporate perspective.
Fascinating. Zeynep, the companies that aren't subjected to the compliance, and so how are they reacting to all this?
I think even before moving on to other companies, you've mentioned something very importantly around how implementation is differing to some of the companies you've spoken to earlier on and versus now. I think if I could give a few examples, because it's really important to emphasize the differences in the amount of pressure that they're getting from Misa at different levels. We've seen companies that bring regional functions to Riyadh that will cover entirely the MENA portfolio. We've seen companies that only bring the management of a few countries into Riyadh. So totally different structures, but they've actually both gotten confirmation from Misa. We've seen some that have decided to, as Mansour mentioned, manage countries such as Kuwait, maybe Jordan, Iraq, etc. But others who have had legacy UAE management from Saudi, which is rare, but they have had it, and that was sufficient enough to create a large kind of substantial business that they should be covering. We've had companies say they've gotten confirmation from Misa if they have their Riyadh office reporting to the UAE, but others that say they've also gotten confirmation if their hub reports to Europe and outside. So the case-by-case implementation has been really drastic in terms of differences. It's just about negotiation power, first of all, but also different realities that each business is in, basically, and what their current level of revenue is in the region, what their current hub structure is in the UAE, what their existing size of team members are already in the region. So this has really, I think, caused some differences in negotiations, which is the flexibility side of the Saudi government, but also the uncertainty side of the regulations, a double-edged sword. I just wanted to add on that front.
Well, no, it's got to be fascinating, because I think you have to applaud the Misa's flexibility. I mean, it's requirement, and you, as with so many things Saudi Arabia is doing now, they tend to put it out there, refine, put it out there, refine, and move towards their ultimate goal, which I think is again commendable. But that does, result in a situation where you may have a bunch of CEOs sitting in a room going, "Oh, you got that deal."
Yes,
I didn't get that
which
deal.
happens at our event. That's true. Yes. When they bring together senior executives, that is exactly what they ask each other. What deal did you get? Exactly.
It's fascinating. And while we're on the topic, because Mansour, you made a very interesting point, and it makes sense. There's the local, sort of essentially there's the local office, and then there's a corporate office. And the corporate office is looking at the whole region. And they have to deal with potential fallout if they're saying, okay, we're going to move the regional HQ from Turkey, or obviously the Emirates is a frequent one. how have they managed this fallout internally? Is that something you guys have a keyhole into?
Yeah, so this was one of the tricky kind of questions and the problems that we've tried to essentially resolve. And from the start, we were very clear in saying you have to think of it not as purely just a regional headquarters approach. You still have a regional hub elsewhere. You still have a lot of business that you're doing in the Emirates or in Turkey, as you mentioned. So what would be the right approach in that sense? And it's one of the actions that we have recommended is to just kind of look at the entire region and not to really kind of go towards one or the other approach at the expense of the other. And what we mean by that is whatever you do, just don't burn bridges with any market that you're operating in. That's number one. Number two, it's not to discount the importance of the other markets, including the UAE. And I think the main message that we wanted to highlight is use them in their various strengths. So there's a very different strength that you can take out operating and having a regional office in Saudi versus having one in the UAE. They operate very differently. We've seen a few different multinationals trying to reshape the wider region. So not just purely Middle East, North Africa, but actually start to look at Middle East, Africa, or more towards the East, and kind of start to divide up the market coverage and the operations between, let's say, the Turkish hub or the hub in Dubai or Abu Dhabi versus the one in Riyadh. That helps shift the weight from one to the other, and then you can kind of go back to Misa and say, actually, look, we're doing substantial work here. Saudi is a very important market for us, and we want to leverage some of the investments that we're doing in Saudi for some of the other markets around us. So we won't do this necessarily at the expense of the UAE, because the UAE office is focusing on other things. This helps smoothen the conversation a little bit more. Zeynep, maybe you can kind of also just add a few of your perspectives and the anecdotes that you've heard on this.
Of course, I think what we've seen from multinationals is very few, if almost none, are moving their existing hub directly exactly in the same structure to Riyadh. Mm-hmm. This all means what Mansour has described as an added cost to companies' regional kind of organizational structure, right? They're adding a layer of management into Riyadh. They're keeping certain levels of engagement in existing hubs, but when you add a layer of, again, regional management, you're just adding cost. And what that requires is for you to have maybe higher targets for the MENA region. Overall, it means you have even higher targets to ensure commercial performance is growing that in a way that justifies your investment into Saudi. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, increasing in costs, of course, increasing exposure, investment and closeness to the customer base in Riyadh and in the region, but also targets go up accordingly with that added cost structure.
Do you have when it was launched in notice was issued in 2019, soon thereafter, I believe they sort of brought out, I think, 42 large multinationals who said, this is, we're going to do this. And you really haven't seen a number since. I haven't anyway. Lucian, you may have. Do you have a sense of the numbers of MNCs that have moved in this direction and are set up to be prepared for that January 2024 deadline?
I think we won't have a concrete figure until early 2024. What we do know is that number is certainly above that 42. Yeah. I think we're a lot, even above 100, maybe above 150 even, actually. The reason for the lack of clarity about the number is that actually right now Misa has a lot of files on its desk that it has to approve. So suddenly you'll see that number maybe jump from 180 to 250 all of a sudden, because now we're in that bottleneck situation, and multinationals again left their right to the end to kind of push through some of their final proposals. But there is a very large number because everyone has now accepted that this is not a bluff. This is not kind of a light approach. There is some real commitment behind the regional headquarters program. So we would expect to see the number kind of even above 200, to be honest.
Fascinating. Zeynep, that question that we put aside, there are companies that don't fall under this requirement. How are they reacting to this? Are they feeling left out? Are they?
Not at all, I guess. And Mansour talks a lot more to companies outside of like those that sell to the public sector. But what I can share at a broad level is we have been getting increasing attention towards Saudi from all sectors, first of all. So we are talking about increasing investments, companies increasing investments into Saudi as part of this RHQ. But actually, even outside of this, we are just hearing every week another board meeting happening, another company bringing their heads of international into the region, another company kind of outlining its long-term Saudi strategy, trying to convince corporates to bring in more resources. So there's definitely a general increasing attention, but also, again, pressure to perform commercially, get these results in as quickly as possible, which is causing a rise in investment into the kingdom. We can see that in kind of publicly available numbers, in private conversations. Overall, there's just expanded exposure, pressure, competition in the kingdom. And I think the regulation will have quite a lot of important economic effects that can have ripple effects onto other sectors. And I think Mansour talks to those companies on those ripple effects. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Mansour.
Yeah. So Zeynep, an MNC makes a decision. They take the leap. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges they're facing? They would have heard from all their folks in the Emirates, I don't want to go, or whatever, mm-hmm. The schools, the entertainment, any number of things that said, that might have been resistance to the move. All right, so the decision is made. So mm-hmm. Now what are these MNCs facing, legally, logistically, human resources ways, everywhere?
Yes, there's a long list of an answer, but I guess the first one that comes up is really talent. Talent management is the first area of focus for companies. We've mentioned our event in September when we bring together any group of executives. Somehow we've been turning into a kind of HR panel at some point, because first of all, cost of employment is higher in Saudi versus the UAE. So first of all, companies had to adjust to even higher compensation packages for the kingdom. Finding talent that is willing to relocate is one challenge. Finding local talent is another challenge. And we've been hearing more concerns about the readiness of the kingdom for this ecosystem for increasing influx of expats. And we know that the country is listening to these concerns. We know that there are efforts to improve this ecosystem, improve availability of education, etc. So I think we will see an improvement in willingness to find talent in Saudi, but that's been the initial challenge. Second has been around as I guess I've mentioned a few times, the rising commercial performance pressure on the region, and having that accurate target, accurate addressable market size that justifies this kind of investment is also a challenge. But what is you've mentioned Qadiyya, there are many projects that are coming up. What is their timeline? How quickly can companies capture them in order to kind of really justify the ROI of this investment? You mentioned, I think, legal. I think we've been hearing from companies challenges on being 100% certain on key tax regulations. That's another uncertainty. And I think it's important to highlight for any company that is willing to do business in Saudi, there's a whole host of localization initiatives and pressures and incentives. The RHQ is one of them. So I think there are a lot of different stakeholders managing different localization elements. So really stakeholder management, devising a wide localization plan for the kingdom, not just for RHQ, but assets, workforce, etc. That I would say would be another key challenge.
As Saudi Arabia has all these goals across any number of sectors. And in order for them to be attractive, in order for them to be feasible or achievable, they've had to reassess and revise and change their regulatory environment in a lot of areas. Is that regulatory reform keeping up in terms of attracting people and making it feasible for them to make the move?
Mansour, if you have anything to add, I would say the first one still, especially you mentioned pharma companies, healthcare sector, IP protection. is still not kind of developing fast enough. I think data privacy laws as well are key focus area for companies to see a bit more certainty. Tax regulations, that's also a third one, and cost of employment in general. I would say not at the management level, but more at the kind of production factors of production level. Uncertainty on minimum wage changes and kind of workforce localization regulations. The quick changes on those have also not been easy for companies to manage.
Interesting, really interesting. So here we are at the starting gate. How will this look? How will this look in a few months, January 2024?
I guess we will all have to wait and see. But until we see how January looks like, what we would expect is for most multinational companies to have finalized their proposals, at least with Misa. We might not be in a world of one day switch where every company has moved their headquarters and is perfectly ready and operational, but at least most multinational companies are likely to have either share their proposals with Misa in the process of finalizing and getting confirmation, in the process of opening up their physical office. Basically, what Misa would like to see is very active preparation on this front if they have not fully.
Interesting. So they just want the papers to be signed January 24th. You might be moving in over the course of a year or whatever, you know.
That's what we're hearing. So this is not, I would not want to be legally quoted on this in terms of, because this also changes. And that's, I guess, the question mark that companies don't have an answer to. And that's why those that are more proactive are getting better deals, right? Because they're not waiting to be the last person on the list to look like they've been forced to do this, but actually companies that are taking the proactive initiative to showcase that are actually getting better response because of this uncertainty. But we don't expect, of course, especially for companies that provide essential products, to be immediately shunned from the market if they don't have the furnished office by January 1st, if that makes sense.
Right. Makes sense.
But what is the UAE's response to this? Are they letting this happen and they're just doing nothing and saying, well, we will outcompete Saudi Arabia? What do they have a plan like this in the mix? I mean, and the same goes for any other GCC state. Do you guys have any insight on that?
Yeah, so I think because we got that question very, very a lot basically over the last few months, and the best way to think about it is the UAE is firstly in its own timeline. It's a very different journey to where Saudi is going at this point. I think originally there were a lot of there were many people essentially trying to say that could this potentially be Saudi Arabia trying to catch up to the UAE, and they're doing it rather aggressively. To some degree, maybe yes, but really Saudi's journey is going to be very different to the UAE's journey. And we have to remember that actually the population dynamics play a very, very important role here. The UAE as a country is very much heavy on the expat population and has a very different structure to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has an enormous domestic population and it serves a different goal in the long term. So what the UAE has been doing is really kind of continuing on its own track. It has its own visions. It's really focusing on making sure that the expats that come to the UAE stay for a longer period of time. So actually, this was the original goal from before the pandemic, but we saw acceleration of those moves during the pandemic of really providing reassurances that you should bring your family over to the UAE. You should think about retirement in the UAE. You should think about actually investing as an expat in the UAE rather than just kind of thinking about, okay, let me accumulate my savings and then take them back home. And the UAE is now shifting its focus on what type of industries it wants to, capitalize on. Yes, the PIF and Saudi are really kind of going all out on a huge number of various industries, but the UAE is actually doing the opposite. It's doubling down on SMEs. It's doubling down on innovative startups, on innovative solutions, on climate solutions. So it's taking its journey to a very different destination, which is also helping serve the long-term goal for the Emirates, which is we want to remain different. We're not saying that it has to come at the expense of Saudi, but we just want to remain different. So these are some of the things that the UAE has been undertaking, and we've seen that through reforms in the visas, the incentives to the SMEs, the encouragements to specific number of industries that continue to receive a lot of funding and support.
It is interesting, and there was a lot of commentary when the notice was first issued about what this meant. Was it going to be, are they going to be head to head, or does the rising tide lift all boats? And it sounds as if they're sorting these things out and playing to the various strengths. I have to say two things that I think are. You said that at some point the MNCs realized the Saudis were serious. And I think that's fascinating, because I think that's true of a lot of things that are going on in Saudi Arabia, where something is proposed or launched and you go, well, really? And then a few years later, you realize, well, they're serious. And I don't know when that occurred, 2021 or 20, I'm not sure when it occurred, but would you say if in fact the numbers look like they're around 200 multinational companies decided to work with Misa to meet these HQ initiative guidelines, would you say that's a success for Saudi Arabia?
I think so far you have seen some of the success of the regional headquarters, because it's come through in different ways. And we've seen maybe success that the kingdom had not originally planned for. You have many companies moving in, but the fact that this regional headquarters has brought in so many multinationals has also, as Zeynep said, really encouraged other industries to increase their investments, although they don't have to comply with the regional headquarters. But all of a sudden, you have a consumer good company saying, oh, actually, the population dynamics are shifting a little bit. Maybe we can bring in this product or this solution, or, change up, kind of take a few more risks to bring in different products into the kingdom. So let's invest a little bit more. We want to put more people on the ground to capitalize on this opportunity. So you're seeing various types of successes. And we do believe that, yes, the regional headquarters will prove to be successful, even if it's, a situation where you might have to really struggle to bring in talent at the start. But the idea is that, 5 years down the line, you will start to see that a lot of that, specialization, the skills do get passed on. You start to have some real material, sharing of knowledge that gets passed on to the up and coming graduates coming out of Saudi universities. And this is where you start to see the success. It's not just going to be in 2024, but we'll have to assess it again in 29 and 30 and 35, as, naturally the economy starts to evolve.
To add on that, I guess the word success can look different for teams based in Saudi UAE versus teams based in the US or outside of the region. Here, corporate alignment is very important. Most of the time, local teams do understand there can be very big headlines related to Saudi. That probably means we will not get all the way there, but we will get halfway, and that will be a lot better than where we were today. And that means local teams do try to set as much as they can realistic targets, but then they have to really communicate. Saudi or many governments in the region never intended all the way up there in terms of their targets, and that alignment of what success means for each company as well as for Saudi is very important.
Mansour El-Zahab, head of MENA for FrontierView, joining us from London, and Zeynep Kosereisoglu, director for Turkey in the MENA region at FrontierView, joining us from Dubai. Thank you both so much. This was terrific. Really appreciate it. Fascinating topic.
The pleasure was all ours.